Steel meets steel. The sound carries across open ground. Brief and sharp, swallowed almost immediately by the wind. Horses surge forward, their hooves cutting into packed earth. Men are thrown from the saddle, lost beneath movement that does not pause for them. Arrows rise and fall in tight succession, darkening the space between riders and shields. Across the grasslands, motion replaces noise. The riders spread, the narrow again. Distance closes, opens, shifts. Each movement follows another without hesitation. No single figure commands the field with gestures or shouting. Direction is understood before it is given. What appears sudden has been practiced many times before. This moment did not begin here. By the time engagements like this take shape, the world that produced them has already changed. The consequences simply arrive later. Only a generation earlier, the men riding together would not have stood side by side. They came from different clans, bound by separate loyalties shaped by old rivalries and remembered betrayals. The open country that formed them had never sustained unity for long. The world disappeared quietly. It faded in the years after a boy named Temujin learned how easily hunger arrives, how quickly protection vanishes, and how unreliable tradition can be when survival is at stake. Across the plains, power was no longer inherited by birth alone. It was claimed through endurance and loyalty, and the ability to hold men together when conditions offered no comfort. By the early 13th century, the grasslands no longer produced scattered raiding groups. They produced a force that moved together. At its center stood a man who would be known beyond the steppe as Genghis Khan, or as many might know, Genghis Khan. There was no single moment when the old order ended. No declaration that marked the transition. Change traveled instead with riders who went farther than expected, returned less often, and answered to a form of authority unfamiliar to settled societies. In 1206, after years shaped by warfare, shifting alliances and exhaustion, Temujin stood before representatives of the Mongolian clans. Along the Anon River, elders spoke, oaths were taken. Old divisions were not resolved so much as worn down. Temujin was proclaimed Genghis Khan, ruler of all under the open sky. Accounts written later describe a man who did not seek attention. He wore plain clothing, avoided display, and remained cautious of excess. Even after unification, his life followed the rhythm of movement he had known since childhood. He was broad in build, hardened by long seasons spent riding, and exposed to the elements. His features bore the marks of weather early. Observers noted his eyes as steady and measuring, fixed less on appearances than on intent. Public speech was rare. When he spoke, his words were brief and direct. Authority did not rely on ceremony. Orders were expected to be understood, not debated. Those who served near him remarked on his memory. Loyalty was recorded carefully. So was betrayal. Neither was forgotten. Both were addressed when timing allowed. He valued discipline above ancestry, ability above lineage. Men advanced by merit rather than birth. Those who failed were removed without exception. Patience defined him as decisive. He could wait through seasons for the conditions he wanted. Once a decision was made, it was carried out fully. Mercy and severity were not opposites, but choices applied according to circumstances. To followers, he represented stability in a landscape defined by uncertainty. To enemies, he appeared relentless. To distant observers, he fit no familiar category, neither king nor simple war leader, but something formed by the conditions of the open land. Later writers remarked that when he listened, his attention seemed directed beyond the speaker, toward the intention beneath the words. Fear followed not from anger or volume, but from consistency. Once a course was chosen, it did not change. What emerged under his leadership was new. The people of the Mongolian plains were unified not through shared ancestry, but through structure. Leadership was no longer inherited, it was earned. This change reached in every aspect of life. Clans were recognized. Old tribal groupings were dismantled and reassembled. Loyalty shifted from blood ties to command. Men who would once have been enemies now depended on one another. Discipline applied equally. Theft carried severe punishments. Desertion was not tolerated. The result was cohesion, a force capable of moving, turning, and striking as a single body. Beyond the steppe, this went largely unnoticed. Nomadic raids were familiar to settled states. They came and went, but this force did not disperse after success. It did not withdraw when challenged. It continued forward. The first campaign targeted nearby states, the Western Shah Kingdom, and the Jin dynasty, to the south and east. They were established societies with cities, walls, and standing armies. For centuries, walls had defined security, height and stone promised protection. But walls assumed an enemy willing to remain in place. The Mongols moved around fortifications rather than toward them. Supply routes were cut. Cities were isolated. Engagements occurred where defenders did not expect them. When pressure increased, the attackers withdrew, only to reappear elsewhere. They adapted quickly. Engineers were spared. Artisans were protected. Those who understood construction, calculation, or repair were kept alive. Knowledge was treated as a resource. By the time the Jin recognized the scale of the threat, response came too late. Cities fell in sequence. In 1215, the Jin capital, Zhengdu, was besieged. For months, defenders resisted. Gunpowder, weapons were deployed from the walls. When ammunition ran low, metals were melted down and used instead. The city eventually fell. For the settled world, the impact was immediate. A capital that had stood for generations had been taken by a force originating from the open plains. The campaign did not end there. Genghis Khan turned west. By 1218, his territory extended farther than any nomadic power before it. Borders shifted with each campaign. Ahead lay the Mongol Empire, wealthy, urbanized, and confident in its strength. Initial contact was not hostile. Envoys were dispatched. Trade caravans followed. The proposal was straightforward. Cooperation brought profit. The response proved disastrous. A Mongol trade mission was seized. Its members were executed. Later envoys were humiliated and killed. Within the culture of the open land, this was not a misunderstanding. It was a declaration. The decision followed without delay. In 1219, Mongol forces entered the Khwarezmian territory from multiple directions. Cities expecting slow approaches instead faced attackers appearing across deserts and mountains previously considered impassable. The pace was sustained and relentless. By 1220, the Mongols reach Bukhara, an ancient city known for learning and its religious life. Its markets were active, its walls had endured. This time, Genghis Khan entered personally. Such appearances were rare. Conquered cities were usually left to commanders. Bukhara was intended to be seen. Later accounts record him addressing the population inside the mosque. He spoke as a man shaped by the open country, not as a ruler of cities. The words attributed to him vary, but the message remained constant. Resistance would not continue. From this point, fear traveled ahead of the army. Some cities surrendered before riders arrived. Others resisted and were destroyed to serve as warnings. This followed a pattern. Submission was met with order. Defiance with elimination. By 1221, the Khwarezmian Empire had collapsed. Its ruler died while fleeing. One of the most powerful states in the region dissolved within a few years. The scale had no precedent. Yet, conquest alone did not explain what followed. Administration developed alongside expansion. Systems of taxation were implemented. Trade routes were secured. Merchants traveled under protection. Relay stations carried messages across vast distances, with speeds unknown to the earlier governments. Law was standardized. Theft punished consistently. Religious practices were tolerated. No single faith was imposed. The empire operated on discipline, communication, and movement. By the early 1220s, Genghis Khan ruled territories stretching from the northern China across Central Asia. He remained mobile. No capital was built. He continued to live as he always had. In 1227, during a campaign against the Western Shah, he had passed away. The cause remains uncertain. Records are limited. His burial was concealed. Those involved were said to have been killed to protect his location. It remains unknown to this day. After death, the man became something else. Stories accumulated. Memories solidified. Authority extended beyond his lifetime. His successors inherited not only land, but momentum. Within decades, the empire expanded further. By 1260, under Kublai Khan, China was unified under Mongol rule. The Yuan dynasty governed until 1294. Paper currency circulated. Trade intensified. Cities grew. What began on the open plains became the largest continuous land empire in recorded history. Interpretations diverged. Early European writers spoke of Genghis Khan with admiration. Later accounts emphasized destruction. Both views simplify a more complex figure. He ordered devastation on a vast scale. He also dismantled entrenched aristocracy, rewarded merit, protected trade, and tolerated belief systems uncommon in his era. He reflected the conditions that produced him. Before his rise, distance separated societies. Afterward, distance no longer protected them. The world entered an age of consequence, and it began far from cities in a landscape that left few records behind.